Welcome to the Suncoast in Depth podcast. I'm Brett Watson, and joining me today is my good buddy Alex Lopez. Thanks for being here, man.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So we've been talking about, really, I've just been interviewing different people who I know have gone through what I call the deconstruction of their faith, at least that much. Some, the reconstruction of faith, and that's why I wanted to do this, is to help people as best I can to reconstruct a faith that is sustainable, meaning, our understanding of reality changes, right? Yeah. That's what science is for, yeah. and philosophy, and it's what theology should do, but it has a much tougher time doing. And what we're seeing in our culture today is people deconstructing. 6,000 to 10,000 churches, something like that, close their doors every year. So a lot of that is because people are just more and more educated, and they're deconstructing from belief systems that are demonstrably untrue. That's the ones I have trouble with. Yeah. It's one thing to have faith in something that you cannot empirically prove. We do that with many, many, many things. But to hang on to belief systems that are demonstrably untrue is obviously a problem. It's you're not dealing with reality. And so a lot of people they're tired of, the way I put this, and I don't mean to be demeaning, so how can I put it? They're tired of, it seems to me, more and more people are tired of leaving or checking their intelligence at the door of the church before they come in. Yeah. And so I know I've gotten to know you over the last few months. We met at it was at Troy's party.
Yes,
Pastor Troy's party,
drinking whiskey.
Yeah. So we had a cool conversation, and some of that had to do with your own deconstruction journey. Yeah. And so I thought, I'm going to have Alex on here, tell his story. So why don't you start off just filling people in on, your religious background.
Sure. It's kind of one of those things that I really look at, and it's hard to identify where it really started in my life. I grew up Methodist and Pentecostal, so it was fun.
You might be interested to know that they actually come from the same holiness movement. Yeah.
And it's funny. I didn't know that until just recently.
Yeah.
And even going to my mom's Methodist church in Venice, I got to know one of the pastors quite well. And this was around the same time frame that we met.
Just pull that mic up a little bit, sure. So that you're talking right into it. Yeah.
So, this was around the same time frame that we had met, and it was everything just happened to fall into place because I needed to have people in my life that I can not only give some of my burdens to, but also receive from, that iron sharpening iron. Mm-hmm. And so Bob and I had lunch, and the great thing about it, within our conversation, he was kind of giving me the history of the Methodist Church and listening to my story of when I actually dedicated my life to God when I was 19. That was in the Pentecostal movement, Pentecostal Church of God. So that was a lot of fun to begin with. Mm-hmm. But I was used to it because, like I said, I grew up in both those areas, going to camp, with
how come it was both? So you said
mother
you
and
might
father.
Already answered. Okay, mother and father. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So with my mom, she grew up Methodist, and the way that she tells the story is that her mom gave her an option. She says, "You're going to be religious. Now, what you decide is up to you." So at least she gave her that choice. Yeah. And so for some reason, my mom chose to be Methodist, and so they started going to a Methodist church, and it was just traditional. It had nothing to do with having that quote unquote relationship with God. It was just, this is what I do. This is, and she's of the generation of that kids are to be seen, not heard.
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I don't know if that really played a
And not
lot
only
into
that,
it.
the generation of religion is just the socially acceptable thing. So you need
Correct.
to pick one and do it.
Yeah.
It's got to be a regular part of your
Yeah.
life experience.
Yeah. That's just what you do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go to work, you go to sleep, you make babies, you go to church.
Yep.
You know, so the fun thing with that is that my brothers and we'd always mess around in church, and we loved the hymns. All of us were just looking at each other, you know, just messing around, throwing stuff at each other.
Yeah.
You know, and this is when I was like, I don't know, 8, 9, when my eldest brother was still living in the house. And actually, that was a lot of fun. That was our moment of being together, where it was that we can kind of let loose and not, I guess, in a way, make fun of everybody and everything that's going around us. So we enjoyed that. But there were really some great moments in it too that I can reflect on and know that those were some building blocks in my life. That I got to see the genuine caring of other people through this church, this Methodist church in San Dimas.
Mm-hmm.
Every Sunday there was a breakfast. And that's what I loved. It was down in the basement. And I just remember the times that we would go. I remember like we park on a certain street. We walk down into the basement. I'm like, oh, pancakes. You know? And what kid doesn't love pancakes?
Yeah, right.
Or penny cakes. You know? So those were some fond memories. Did I really draw close to God during that time frame? No. I didn't even know what God was about, even though going to Sunday school. It was just another one of those automatic things of, this is just a routine that really is not benefiting me in any way that I saw at the time, but just the development of that routine.
Yeah. And developmentally, I mean, what are we supposed to expect from kids that are at that stage of development?
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, like at Suncoast, the children's ministry is very, very prioritized, but it isn't so that we can properly educate them in Christendom. You know, it's so that they grow up in a safe community where they know they're loved, and at the center of that love is the God of love. That's really the aim here. You know?
Yes, absolutely.
And you got that
Yeah.
in that Methodist
Exactly.
church.
And so as that being part of the building block that still remains in my life, and so I'm very appreciative of that. On the other side, the Pentecostal side, well, that was a lot of, I'm not going to say a lot more fun, but it was fun in its own way.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we're going to camp and I'm there with my cousins.
So you went to the Methodist church every Sunday.
Pretty much every Sunday that I was with my mom.
So then the Pentecostal got mixed in through the camps?
Yes. So my dad, his dad remarried. And so that side of the family was Pentecostal. And being that this was, my dad is the eldest of his siblings. And so with the youngest of the siblings, Joe, so he and I, 13 years apart. And I always used to call him Uncle Plaything. You know? And so, yeah.
Could be taken the wrong way
Yeah,
these days.
yeah. That's
Especially
true.
since he's clergy.
Yeah. Ooh, Uncle Plaything. Let me sit on your lap. You know, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But it's just because you guys were so close in age, and so okay.
Yeah. And you know, I loved him dearly. He has since passed away, and he was a big, big part of my life since I was a little kid. And so he represented to me a different kind of love and a real stable love, even though now I could never go back to that Pentecostal environment, even though there's many things that I still find absolutely wonderful. Certain things, it's just not me. And not that I feel that it's wrong in any way. It's just not me. That's it.
So you ended up kind of, I know this from talking with you, you ended up actually being in ministry.
Correct.
On staff,
Yeah.
right, at a Pentecostal church.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
So when I accepted in that form of God into my heart at 19, my life was always about giving in some way or another. I knew that from an early age. And I always was a person that was rebellious, needed to do things my way. So in that, I also was very impatient. And I felt like the things that I would receive, oh man, I might be good at giving this stuff to other people in the form of teaching, preaching, evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
So I started, before I became a youth pastor at 21, I thought that my purpose was to be an evangelist. So I started going out and preaching at different churches. And that was short-lived, but it kind of gave me an understanding that there was a purpose for my life. And so when the opportunity came up to become a youth pastor at a church in Ontario, PCFG church in Ontario, I talked to my pastor and I said to him, I've only been doing this for a short time. Do you think that I'm ready? And I wish he would have told me no. So, or at least because he was a youth pastor at one point too. That's kind of like the natural progression with Pentecostals is if you're going to be in ministry, it was, if you're not a missionary, you're going to start off as being a youth pastor. And before you become a youth pastor, you need to start cleaning toilets and praise God for cleaning those toilets, all that kind of crap.
Yeah.
So, well, I shouldn't say crap, just their process of doing things.
Yeah.
So, for me, it was, when I was talking to my pastor, I had no idea what I was getting involved in. But where my heart was at is that I wanted to impart to these kids, kind of going back to the whole camp thing. So camp was always a part of my life. And that's where I accepted God into my heart, was at camp at 19. After, I don't know what that month was like. It was either I was smoking weed, doing ecstasy, drinking, So because all I cared about was to party, work and party, And I was burnt out, of 30 days straight of working, drinking, smoking weed, doing ecstasy, partying. And I think I was at the moment in my life at camp where I said, you know what, I'm just tired of this. I know who you are. I've been around you long enough, Lord. Now I want you to have control over my life because I'm just screwing everything up. So for that reason and the environment that I was in, I saw many kids that were, not that they did what I did, but that they were going through that same process of, I just want something more. Some kids even were suicidal because they just didn't feel like anybody loved them or appreciated them. And in a way, I understood that because there was a point in my life that I felt that way. So I just wanted to give. And so the natural progression is that I become a youth pastor. Mm-hmm. And, I don't regret it. There were moments that it was really rough, so yeah. Other times that it was so fulfilling that I would see one kid, Troy, when he was talking about this last Sunday of the one boy being there for the other boy.
Yeah.
Boy, that resonated with me. Boy, yeah, I'm going to just keep saying boy. So,
it did with me too.
Yeah.
I was, first 15 years of my ministry was in youth.
Yeah.
And I had, when he was telling that story about those two boys that were so different worlds, they come together and they love each other. And in the end, I had other faces that I could plug into very similar stories, of kids. So yeah, that's definitely the fulfilling part.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I wanted to do. That's what I saw. That was what my vision was. Now that vision got dampered many times.
Sure.
And so as far as like the whole deconstruction thing, it started before it even began. Is that?
Well, that's a fair statement.
Yeah.
That's probably, if you dig into everybody's story, there's some of that same beginning.
Absolutely.
Right? But go ahead.
Yeah, because
so where do you? Was there a certain point where your deconstruction became more defined, though?
Yes, right after a big incident happened as a youth pastor. Actually, I wasn't a youth pastor anymore. And the reason that happened is because I was moving. And I'll never forget with my pastor, he kept saying, my logic was, well, I don't have a home to stay at here in this area, so I'm going to move back to my dad's. Plus, I was always making the commute for work anyways. 45 minutes, well, technically 45 minutes, depending on what time of the day it was in LA. So I'm only like 30 miles away, but that could still be 2 hours. And I'm on my little 250 Honda Rebel, so going back and forth on a little motorcycle, and sometimes it's fun, but other times, no, not so much.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there would have been an opportunity for me to stay with somebody, but I was also ready to move on. I was hurt, and I didn't know how to deal with that hurt, and I didn't have that support. That I would say that support to say, I'm sorry you were never told what you were getting involved in, and that there are going to be major sacrifices that you'll make. There's going to be some suffering that you're going to go through because you love and you care. And also, you're still young and you're single. That was probably the biggest problem, is that, and I was still very rebellious. I wanted to do things my way and not really fit into the system of how the church was operating, how the pastor was operating. Now, he also never fully gave the youth over to me. I wasn't preaching every Wednesday night for youth. I was taking these kids out and doing stuff with them. I was the one on the phone with them. I was the one consoling them. One of my kids was shot at. And so he decided that the best way to protect himself was that he needed to carry a gun with him all the time. And we talked for hours about that. And so things like that, and also for me, and I've dealt with situations like that when I was his age, younger, 13, 14 years old, when I thought I was Little Capone. My brother's gang name was Capone. And so when he left, they wanted me to fill his shoes. So, hey, Little Capone, so yeah. And that's also why I moved to my dad's as well, to get away from all that stuff. So I also identify with what these kids were going through. And it was hard. It was heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. And I would have loved to just embrace them in the way that God does, of those wonderful wings of love that you can just have that security and safety in.
Yeah.
But me being immature, not only in Christ and in age and in those situations, I couldn't give fully, and that broke my heart. And I didn't know how to deal with that either. I didn't have a pastor that was really nurturing me in a way that to say, you're going to be putting out so much, and many times you're not going to receive anything back. You need to know where to go to get replenished. And I wasn't getting replenished. And so therefore I started becoming very bitter and resentful. And rather than seeking after somebody like my Uncle Joe to be in his presence and to get replenished, I just decided, the hell with this. I'm done.
So you threw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater?
Yes. For many years of my life, it was back and forth, back and forth. Oh, beautiful baby. Out you go.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
your deconstruction, at least where it becomes easy to define, happened where so many start to deconstruct. It's usually something that occurs within relationships.
Yes.
That people find they cannot reconcile their expectations of the people of God with their experience of the people of God. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then God goes with them.
Yeah.
In many respects, I find that typically, if the church will go, they still have their own personal belief in God. they have no problem with Jesus. Many people do that. Is that where you were? Like, you still were okay with God?
Yes and no. I mean,
Okay.
I think what it came down to was, God, if you're this real, and what I've been taught, more so than what I read, but what I was taught, omnipresent, omnipotent, you've already laid the path for me. You're doing absolutely everything. Shit, all I got to do is just hang on. No. So when that realization came about and the doubt started coming about, I didn't know how to problem solve.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to overcome because I was only going off of, well, I shouldn't say only. I was going off of my emotions and going off of what I was taught. And that's kind of the scary thing in this whole environment. And you see so much ignorance within a charismatic evangelical movement because they don't investigate for them. Many don't investigate for themselves. They're going off of what they were taught, what the preacher said, what the pastor said. You know, one of the things that I was told by, I won't say who, but somebody that was influential in my life, a family member, that you needed to give up all your music. And I had a big treasure trove of all kinds of different music, but it's all secular music. You can't be listening to no secular music.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't glorify God. And I'm like, but this is my treasure chest. And so she says to me, God will give you a new treasure chest and he'll fill it. Which I do believe that. God does give us new things, constantly fills us. That's what the whole thing of the wineskin is about.
Mm-hmm.
But music is not going to take me away from God. As a matter of fact, I think it draws me closer. I can appreciate Billy Joel.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate Jane's Addiction. You know? And I love me some, you know, Primus. Maybe not all the songs. You know, so I get filled in a different way now where I thought it was wrong then. And that was really difficult. All of these things, they were so difficult to me. And I never really got on board with all of it. Even smoking. And we had talked about this whole situation of smoking. And this is what kind of started the downward spiral from me truly leaving as a youth pastor. It wasn't just because I was moving. This was one of the things where I said, I'm done. And I'm just biding my time to get out of here.
What happened?
That was interesting. So my pastor felt he had revelation that God had told him that smoking is a sin and that everybody in the congregation needed to stop smoking. Do I agree with smoking? No. But yet I smoked for well over 20 years of my life. Mm-hmm. And I know what the damages are for that. But is that going to send me to hell? No. And so we lost half of our congregation, you know, and I was still smoking at the time because I smoked because I didn't want to smoke weed. And that was the reason why, because once again, it was, you smoke weed, man, that's the devil's dandelion, baby. You know, you're really going to hell now. So, and for me, it didn't bother me one way or another. As a matter of fact, there was a point where a friend of mine that was at the church, part of the singles group, even though he's in his 40s and I'm 21, 22 years old, he and I were really close friends. So I was hanging out with him one day, and he's like, hey, dude, you want to smoke some weed? I'm like, I'm licking my lips, like, yeah. So, yeah. So we smoked out, and we talked about this whole smoking thing, and he says, you know, what would happen to me if I told him what I truly smoke? And I just thought about that at that point. You're right. You are no different to me. That love, that person that I feel that enhances my life and is filled with the Spirit of God. I don't see you any different.
Because you smoke weed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's because I was in a haze myself, you know. So, yeah, but so it became an ordeal, and it got to the point where I verbally said I disagree with the policy or with his stance on things. Somehow that got to another family member, and normally I would be a counselor up at camp, and that was something I was always looking forward to, not just because the cabin that I was usually a counselor for was my kids and kids from Hesperia, California. And before I chose to go to Ontario, they were considering me for Hesperia, and the kids wanted me to come to Hesperia as their youth pastor, even though they still had a youth pastor, you know. But that's the bond that I made with all of them.
Yeah, that's what camp does.
Yeah, exactly. So my uncle, another uncle, not Joe, he was in charge of all the youth pastors in Southern California, the PYPA, Pentecostal Young People's Association president. I shouldn't really say in charge, but he well, I'll just leave it at that. I can't really define exactly what he did. So, good man. I always loved him. But in this particular situation, it was extremely, extremely difficult for me. So I said to him, well, you know, I want to be a counselor. Oh, Alex, you know, we're full. We don't need any more counselors. I'm like, what? That's never the case. You know, it's always you're begging for people. So I decided to go up to camp anyways. I get there and, you know, I'm being greeted by all these kids and other counselors. Like, oh, man, because a lot of times this is the only time we get to see each other is that year of camp, unless it's like going to conferences. So Steve sees me and I go to him and the first thing he says, Alex, what you doing here? I thought I told you we didn't need you. And I said to him, you know, Steve, if you wanted me here, you would allow me to stay here. He says, you're right, and I don't want you here. And then he just lit into me. And part of that is that, now he didn't say it this way, but I'll say it this way. You're talking shit about Richard, my pastor. And that's the game of telephone kind of thing. However it got to him was, I'm talking shit about Richard.
Yeah. In reality, you just disagreed with his stand on smoking and what it did to the church.
Exactly. Yeah. Richard was so important in my life. He was, even if I didn't agree with him fully, he was a great mentor to me. I spent so much time with him. And that was one of the biggest heartbreaking moments in my life at that time, was leaving that church, because I was also leaving a man who meant so much to me. So now, being that I was young too, was there a possibility that I said something inappropriately about him? Probably. Yeah. Hell, I still do shit like that. So I wouldn't doubt that I did say something. But was it something so traumatic that it put people's lives on hold and created an environment where it's like, you know what? Alex doesn't love God because he said this about Richard.
And he actually said something like that to you,
Yes,
right?
he did. He says, you know, Alex, I doubt if you ever loved God.
Yeah.
That was the spike to the heart.
Yeah.
It took me, I don't know, almost 20 years, maybe more than that, to get over it and to actually have grace enough to say, Steve is human just like me. In the ways that I made mistakes, Steve
made a mistake.
Yeah, and he should be allowed to express himself. It doesn't matter if he was wrong. And I will say to it, and I have not said it to him, and maybe one day I will. Steve, you were wrong. And perhaps he doesn't even remember that situation. You know, I'd like to think that he doesn't, because I've had interactions with him afterwards. The last one was when my Uncle Joe was diagnosed with cancer. Actually, he was getting his treatment for getting his the fluid chemo. Yeah, he was getting his first chemo treatment, and so
you're the medical guy.
Yeah, I know. Hey, now. So, I fix wounds.
Okay.
So you get shot, I'm your guy. But I flew out to California. We were living here in Florida by that time. And so just in that whole situation in itself, it was pretty heartbreaking. But it felt so good to be there and to be able to support Joe and my Aunt Tammy and his family. And Steve and Tricia is my aunt. She's the relationship to my Uncle Joe. Mm-hmm. And so when they were there, it was as if everything melted away. Like all the pain, all the resentment that I had melted away because just one incident. And it was, I went to go pick up food with Steve. And it reminded me of the good moments that we had when I was driving them around to do speaking engagements or preaching at different churches. Before all this stuff happened, before I became a youth pastor, I was hanging with them.
Yeah.
You know.
See, this I think is important to point out. And this was alluded to in the sermon Sunday, that proximity. It's one thing when your perspective is changed by information, good. But what's so powerful in changing a person's perspective is proximity. And what that trip did is it put you in proximity with Steve again. Yeah. And this is what is so dangerous about what I see happening in the whole deconstruction movement, is churches ostracizing, quote, heretics because they don't agree with demonstrably untrue stuff.
Yeah.
Or they've been hurt in relationships in the community and whatnot, instead of reaching out and saying, hey, at the end of the day, we need each other. We're family. We can agree to disagree. And so what they end up doing is they eliminate proximity. And so what do you see happening in that world? You see more and more demonization as they lose proximity because they've separated these people from themselves because they don't agree with them.
Yeah. And
now they live increasingly in a very black and white reality that isn't reality, a pseudo-reality. Very black and white. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. That's what's so dangerous about the way things are going, not just in the religious world, but you see it in politics. You see it everywhere. We're more divided today as a country and we're not the only country that's experiencing this. So it's fascinating to watch, but it's also a little scary. But anyway, so that's what happened with you and Steve. All of a sudden you had proximity. You simply took a drive to go pick up some food together, and all of a sudden that proximity changed your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And eliminated the hurt and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. As I realized just recently, I realized this, I had always been a very judgmental person. And in the sense of what it did to me was created an environment where I was just rattling things in my brain, making things bigger than what they were, and not releasing this stuff, hanging on to it for dear life as justification for my emotional baggage, and that to be able to blame, whether it was even blaming myself, So once I got to that point of realization of this judgment, it's like, wow, now I can see things a little bit clearer, and I can start to understand that why I went through this deconstruction phase of my life, and understanding that it has been there for a long time. And really what I look at it is, this is what the Bible talks about, being a child and having that milk. Mm-hmm. We all have to have that milk. We all have to grow. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter how impatient you are. Like for me, I wanted to be plopped right out of the womb and start running.
Yeah.
So, speaking as if I want my pipe, and and have my blazer sitting at a cafe in France, and let me tell you the things of life.
Yeah, right.
As a baby. And so, but that's kind of a reality. We think that we're supposed to know these things and understand these things when we're young. We haven't matured yet, and that's what I look at this reconstruction thing as maturing, and that it's an ongoing process that more or less doesn't stop, or at least you don't want it to stop.
You shouldn't want it to
Yeah,
stop.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
there's that thing of when you're in the valley, it's okay. It's okay to be there. It's okay to go through all these things that you don't want to go through, these trials and tribulations that James talks about. Why? Because it helps you. It helps you so much go through this stuff, develop patience, and start to learn to overcome, start to build so that you are lacking nothing. But that's an ongoing process. It's as if, I run now on a regular basis. It doesn't always feel good, but I know if I don't, or if I stop running, I lose my gains in this whole thing. And to restart running, which I can, it's as if I got to start all over again. So why don't I just continue to just keep running? As Paul says, you got to run that race. So this is just a process that we all go through, and that we need to go through, just in general, in life.
Yeah.
We're not in high school for the rest of our lives, even though many of us still are.
Especially religiously. It's like the average, years ago anyway, they had I think it was a Gallup poll, and they found that the average church attender had the equivalence of a third grade understanding of their faith. Third grade Sunday school understanding of their faith. Yeah.
But hell, that still gets them to church. After all, isn't that what it's all about? Church, baby. So, yeah.
And it just isn't, right?
Exactly.
It's really about becoming the best version of yourself, or the Alex that Jesus would be if Jesus were Alex.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that is a process, and it is a lifelong process, maybe even lives-long process. Who knows?
I'm starting to kind of embrace that, theory, or whatever you want to call it.
What do you mean?
That there might be multiple lives.
Yeah. Historically, I mean, a lot of Christians don't know this, but there have always been Christians that were bought into the idea of multiple lives. Yeah. I'm not saying I know that or anything. I just that is historical, though.
Yeah.
It's not a demonic heresy or anything. It's just,
I think that's where the ignorance comes into of this absolute way of thinking, that if it's not, it has to be this way. If you're outside of this way of thinking, even though they don't understand the roots of where that came from, they just look at, well, this is what I'm taught, this is what I'm told. And if you are outside of this parameter, you're wrong. And that was where I would say the deconstruction was always happening, because I never really agreed with any of that.
Yeah, that rebellious side.
Yeah. But I use my rebellion now in a different way. I use it as a challenge, not as to try to be set apart, because I don't want to be set apart. I want to be included. I want to be a part of the body of Christ. I don't want to be a part of church, but the body of Christ. And church is just one of those ancillary things. It's not the end all. And unfortunately for so many, that kind of seems to be the end all. Like I was saying, that your way of progressing is first you start off cleaning the toilets at the church. You go and you set up the chairs, or you do these things. You be of service to the church, not to the body of Christ. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. And you can see that development. You were talking about maturity, right? Reconstruction is really a process of maturing, and that happens throughout your lifetime. And you can see that on a societal level. Like, you can see that throughout human history, right?
Yes.
So human beings start off as let's just say hunter-gatherers. Let's start there. And they would not survive if they were not tribal about their tribe, right?
Yes.
And so that helped humanity to stay alive, right? Tribalism helped humanity to survive. But tribalism was probably, it has to be in the top 5 things that got in the way of civilization, because you had all these warring tribal factions because they were so tribal in their thinking. But finally, some of them grow to the point where tribes can come together and they become a civilization. And now we're at a place where all that tribalism now takes the form of like nationalism.
Yeah.
And my country's the best, and no matter what, at the expense of everything else, I'm going to be America.
Yeah.
All of that stuff, if we're going to mature, all that stuff has to take more and more of a back seat, right?
Yes.
This tribalistic kind of view of, I'm a part of the Baptist Church. Let's just pick on them for a second. I'm a Baptist, and Roman Catholics are all going to hell. That kind of thing. Come on, this is the stuff that we've got to let go of. This stuff, guys. Because imagine what would happen if the church was willing just to admit what they don't know. Okay, admit that they don't know all the things that they've been saying they know. In other words, just being honest, right? And committing to what we actually do know, that Jesus wants us to work together.
Yeah.
Okay, that's easy to know, right? And nobody would even disagree with that.
Yeah.
Jesus wanted unity. Just read John 17, right? Whatever, and many other places. Imagine what the church would be if they actually just agreed to disagree and get to work on the things that we do agree on, like taking care of the have-nots of the world, combating disease, imagine the resources that would come to bear on humanity's problems if the church could just stop being tribal.
Yes.
Just that immaturity level, if that could just be taken care of. You want to think, even if you want to think demonstrably untrue things like the earth is 6,000 years old, you want to think that. All right, brother, I can still call you a brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're wrong, and I can prove that, but we don't need to fight about that.
Yeah.
Let's pool our resources and take care of these people who need our help in Jesus' name.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you can't get together and do that because I think that the earth is 4.5 billion years old based on tons of evidence and science, and you think the world's 6,000 years old, you can't work with me to take care of the needs of these people? Why?
Yeah.
This is just nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So I hope that telling stories like this, that's what I mean by a more sustainable faith, right? Where we're just being honest enough to say, well, okay, you know what? We should be working together. We should be coming together to take care of humanity's issues as best we can. And we can do that in Jesus' name, because that's definitely what Jesus was about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
when the disciples came back to him and said, there are people out there doing things in your name, but they're not among us.
Yeah.
And it's
showing their tribalism.
Yeah. And so these people
He said, hey, if they're not against me, they're for me.
Exactly. And they had to hear the message at some point, whether they were there in that gathering around Jesus and getting that message directly from him, or those people taking it out to others, got into their soul in such a way that they needed to spread that message. And that message was not different from the message that Jesus sent those disciples out to carry that good news out to all the people.
Yeah.
So I'll never forget when I was reading that scripture, in one of my Bibles, I wrote down Catholics.
Did you?
Yeah. Because it was in the Pentecostal environment, everybody, even the Baptists are wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So
very tribal.
Yeah. And it was hard. One of the big things that hit me, I never thought I was going to live to be 25, not because of what I was putting up my nose or anything like that, but because I listened to a pastor that professed to be a great prophet. And now this was Church of God, that many within the organization felt that he was a prophet as well. And he gave all the reasons why Jesus was coming back at this particular time. And I'm like, oh, hell, that's before I'm 25. well, I guess I better get all my shit together,
Right.
because Jesus is coming back. After all, don't we store all our riches in heaven? You know, isn't it
I love
all?
what Troy said Sunday. He said, you know how many times we're coming up to the end of the world?
Oh yeah, yeah,
It didn't end.
yeah.
At 9:00, he goes, it's so ironic.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
I've taken enough of your time, but I really appreciate you sharing all this and being vulnerable about your own experience. Is there any one thing that to kind of end with that you would tell somebody if you have a lot of these people that are deconstructing their belief systems? Is a very difficult thing to do. There's a lot of grieving. There's a lot of loss involved. Loss of community, loss of bedrock things that were in your life, that gave you a sense of who you were in the world. And therefore a lot of personal identity gets lost, and they're sitting there and they've got all this debris from their deconstruction. They've demolished their faith, and maybe they've thrown the baby Jesus out with the bathwater. Is there anything that from your experience that you'd like to give that person and say, hey, it doesn't have to be this way?
Yeah. There's obviously a whole lot. If I were to say a few things, one is that you have to stay the course. And there is, I think as human beings, we expect things to be smooth.
Does stay the course mean, just to ask you to clarify that a little bit, does stay the course mean just stick with where you are with that community, even though they've rejected you or whatever?
No,
right.
absolutely.
Does that mean stick with certain doctrines that you learned?
No. You can take things from that. Staying the course is what I would say is that course of deconstruction, and which is the course of maturity. So there are things that you will always release in your life. Sometimes we have great friends, and they were great at that time frame. Sometimes those great friends turn out to not be so great of friends, and you got to release them. When you get involved in a relationship, you get married, you're not a single person anymore. You've actually have changed now. Now it is, and I strongly believe this, two becoming as one. Not literally one, but as one. Because now you have different responsibilities and you have a different mindset and different goals. In the reconstruction process is kind of the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You have a different mindset, different goals. And really the main thing is truth is kind of, everybody has their own views on things, but there is a generalized truth. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that generalized truth is the Trinity. That doesn't, to me, is not the focus. To me, the focus is that the Bible, or I should, let me rephrase that. The Trinity, according to what the Bible is, like as if that's where the ultimate information comes from, is the Bible.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about more. So because so many people use that Bible in a way that, man, just beats people up. Just beats them up like crazy.
And from a position of ignorance, especially if they are beating people up with it. It definitely is coming from a place of ignorance. But
yeah. So you support this notion of these.
So would a generalized truth, or I think when I was talking with Ricardo, we called it principle to live by, that you can definitely learn a lot from Jesus in, would be truth and love.
Correct. Absolutely. And so what I would say is a good example is a Good Samaritan story. That those religious people, though they actually did give something, peace be with you. you know? And so how many religious people do the same thing of that peace be with you? I'm going to tithe. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Not for the benefit of others, even though I'm saying, well, I'm giving to the church. But a lot of times you're giving because that's what you're told to do. You're told to tithe in order to be blessed. So there is an exchange there, a trade-off.
Transactional.
Yeah. Not because it's what's in your heart. and that transformation has taken place. And so that's why I say
Stay the course in that sense.
Yes.
Stay the course of transformation into the very best,
Yeah.
we would say as Christians, a Christ-like version of yourself.
Exactly.
Even if that means that you have to leave a community that you were a part of.
Yeah.
Or, and maybe it's also good to, I think it is, to stay the course in terms of try to find some community. Because we are designed to be interdependent, right?
Yeah.
And we can do more together than we
Yes.
can as individuals, right?
Yeah.
To help the world. So, yeah, man, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I've taken this journey this month, and I'm coming to the end of this journey, which was, I wanted to explore who I am. I wanted to explore what is out there where I belong.
That's a good course to stay on too.
Yeah, yeah. And
Self-discovery.
Exactly. And so in that process, I came to understand this is my community, Suncoast, because I was very doubtful. I was thinking I'm going to blow everything up. All my relationships, everything that I'm doing, because nothing seems to really be working. Well, what was the common denominator? Me. So it had nothing to do with anybody
good,
else. Man. It was all about me. I was in a position where, I divorced last year. We divorced in March. After over 20 years of being married, going through many different things in life. We met in the Navy. So, the reason we got married is because she was pregnant. Not the best reason to get married. And I wanted, from the very beginning, I wanted out. And I kept saying to myself, what the hell am I doing? I'm from LA. She's from Kentucky. Come on now. That's just some craziness. But over the time frame of 20 years, we got to really be connected. And yes, it was bad. Many times it was bad. But there was still good times. Well, in reality, that's kind of the process we go through in all things. Like I was saying, we go through trials and tribulations. If we have the right mindset going through that stuff, we benefit. I like what John Maxwell wrote about these type of things. When it comes to obstacles, they're really opportunities. And if you don't look at it as an obstacle that's going to take you off your course or what have you, and you look at it as an opportunity, that builds you and helps you develop as you're staying the course. And so sometimes problems come about that you blast through them. Other times you go around them. But if you don't know who you are, you can't really identify those problems well enough. So that's why I say it first starts within you, and the common denominator is you. We create things that a lot of times aren't even there. But the positive is we also can create an environment where we develop balance in our life. And so I would say that was also a big, big part of
your reconstruction journey.
Yes. Is it to have that
balance.
Yeah. It's like, I've been big into exercise, but I'm still learning. With the running, I'm still learning how to run. It's not just a matter of distance. I'm learning how to plant my feet properly, breathing, the way I swing my arms, the lean that I have. I don't have the opportunity to be trained properly, but the beauty of nowadays, you can look on YouTube, go do a Google search, and you've got lots available to you.
So stay the course of keep growing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a process.
Yeah.
And it's developing that patience is a big, big part of it, because that was something I just didn't have. But now I'm really starting to develop that. And the relationships I have now, the ones that I wanted to blow up, they're good, So sometimes you want to blow up your kids, but hell.
So, that's why kids are so valuable for soul shaping, right? Because you can't really blow them up.
Yeah.
Even though you feel like it sometimes. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
I appreciate your story and your friendship and
Yeah.
and your willingness to share it with everybody. So
yeah, I appreciate it.
all right, thanks.
All right.